But there's one other issue I wanted to raise, which is the ending of the story. And the story ends with this very dramatic moment. Sherlock Holmes hits the bust with a hammer, and comes up with the plum in the pudding. Is the great black pearl of the Borgias. And we have Rich on the line. I know Rich is an attorney. Maybe several others of you are as well. I'm definitely not. I'm an old country sawbones. But Rich, what does he do? What does Sherlock Holmes do when he buys the bust? Forget about before he breaks it. Mr. Sandiford of Reading comes. What does Sherlock Holmes make Mr. Sandiford do? He hands over the money. Rich, you tell me.
Yeah, he makes the contract so that he doesn't want to go after that jewel afterwards, that he's giving up all rights to it.
Right. He makes him sign a piece of paper transferring, and I think I got the phrase, every possible right. Now, I've always wondered, we don't need to see what would happen in a court of law, but I always wondered that contract was drawn up under somewhat fraudulent circumstances, because Mr. Sandiford didn't know what was in the bust and Sherlock Holmes did, but that's for another. I'll let you deal with that, Rich, as a lawyer. But the point is, before he breaks the bust, he draws up this rather binding contract and then shoos Mr. Sandiford out of there, right? So he's gone. Okay. He breaks the bust, and there's the pearl. Okay. After everybody goes ooh and ah, what does he then do?
Puts the pearl in a safe.
No, he does something before that.
Before that.
Before he puts it in the safe.
In his pocket?
No. He breaks it. He's holding it up. What does he say to Lestrade?
Well, I know that Watson and Lestrade applauded him for that, and then
right.
He was.
And after everybody's done oohing and eyeing,
yeah, and he does
Lestrade?
a little bow. He takes a bow, and then there's a little bit of humanity there, and then he goes right back to being Sherlock Holmes.
But what does he tell Lestrade to do? I think this is really important.
Oh.
Okay, he tells Lestrade, you can go.
Oh, yes, he does.
Right? Now, meanwhile, Sherlock Holmes has just taken possession of a major piece of stolen property, which is clearly, the object of Scotland Yard's searches. There's a sworn officer of the law standing there. Sherlock Holmes finds this incredibly valuable item. He then tells the sworn officer of the law to leave without giving him
the evidence.
Transfer of the stolen property. And then, as Sandy says, he says, put it in the safe. Well, what the heck do you think he's doing at that point? What does anybody think? I've got an idea, but let's hear what you think.
I think he's going to return it, but he's going to get a very, very nice little fee for finding it.
He's going to get a finder's fee, because I don't know if they had what kind of insurance they had in those days, but he certainly knows that there's a reward. I'm sure he figured that much out, or there could be, and he's not about to share it with Scotland Yard. So I've always thought that was, and again, let's talk about similarities that Linda and Beth have brought up repeatedly, and they're repeatedly correct. There's one other story that ends with a bit of hinkiness about money in the canon, and I just love it. Again, similar in its own way, a similar canon. Rich is moving around. What do you think, Rich?
Priory School.
Yeah.
Right.
He gets the checks from Holderness, and also with the lady whose son died.
Three Gables,
right?
Yeah. He gets paid under sort of. First of all, we're never even sure how much money he gets in Priory Scholars. Some people say £6,000. Some people say 12,000. It's a hell of a lot of money by their standards. And Vincent, I'm not going to get into chronology, but I've always regarded Priory School, which is, what Rich mentioned, as one of these similarities. I think it only takes place a couple of years before Holmes retires. Now, am I right, or am I at least on the right track, Vincent? Yeah, and Holmes retires rather young, doesn't he? I mean, again, I don't want to get into chronology, but he's already been retired for quite a while by 1914 when he's a man of 60. So, between the Black Pearl of the Borgias and the Three Gables, and maybe, as Sandy says, a big reward for finding this pearl, which he ain't sharing. Sherlock Holmes manages to do, as a relatively young man, even by the standards of that day, he retires kind of young, and he seems quite comfortable, out with his bee farm on the Sussex Downs. So, every now and then you got to
Carbuncle
watch.
has a big reward.
I'm sorry, Sandy.
Blue carbuncle, you forgot.
Blue
That has a
carbuncle, there
reward.
must have been a big reward. Absolutely. Because again, he's not rushing to return this stuff to the rightful owner. Rather, he's not rushing to return it to the cops. He's going to make his own deal with the rightful owner. So he's done well by doing well.
And he had 1,000 other cases too, though. We only heard of 60.
Yeah, we only heard of 60.
That's
But, but even if we just
Yes.
focus on that, he's probably got enough swag to retire at 47 or however young he was at the time. Well, those are the concepts. And again, I hope I didn't take too much of the limelight from Linda and Beth. I want to give you those are kind of the concepts that I wanted to bring to the discussion. But let me turn it back with my thanks for inviting me and
Well,
your
we're
courtesy
grateful to have
and
you here.
to come here. Thanks for inviting me. And maybe Linda and Beth, you have a couple other points you want to raise. So let me give it back to you.
One thing you mentioned, that there were so many thousands of cases that we never got. There's actually one mentioned in this story, and would make a great one if somebody decided to take it and write a pastiche about it.
I think it's been done.
It may be the Abernathy family and the question of the parsley melting in the butter. That's
Right. And then at the end, there's the Conk Singleton forgery
oh,
paper.
that's it. That's that one too.
Right.
So we've got two of the tantalizing lost cases. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that that struck me, because my other career is with the newspaper here, is the way that Holmes manipulated the press to suit his investigation. So I thought that was, some things never change, and how the Harker was looking for a sensational story, and he
About
was
a madman.
about a madman, and Holmes just fed right into that to take the focus off of what he was trying to find in his search for clues. So I just kind of wanted to know what anybody else thought about his manipulating the press.
I think mostly that I've gotten the impression that the press at that time was easily manipulated.
They were looking for sensational things.
I mean, with how many papers, how many editions are going out day by day, they've got to fill them with something other than agony columns.
Right.
So
I thought
any story is a good story.
I thought it was interesting that Harker was worried that he was going to be so distraught that he couldn't write. I can't, with all the reporters that I've worked with over the last 30 years, I can't imagine anybody being too distraught to get the news out.
Yep.
In the middle of the night, whatever happens, if they're a part of the incident or the situation, they sit down and write. So I thought it was interesting that he was a little neurotic to the point where he couldn't write it.
Well, that was kind of an opening for me about Doyle and his self-promotion. He, of course, was knighted for being a war correspondent. And then in World War I, he got himself posted to cover the Italian-Austrian border, where he risked his life, actually, but he went over there in a strange custom uniform that he had made to promote himself as an official war correspondent.
Well, Alan, you raise a good point, because, and I'll just add a little bit to it, that Conan Doyle was, I guess you could argue he was knighted for being a war correspondent, but very specifically, he was knighted for writing a pamphlet that sold extremely well, which was a defense of the Boer War, which was, even in its day, a very controversial undertaking in England. And he wrote a defense of it. And the argument is that he was knighted because he had written this, what amounts to blatant propaganda, frankly. I mean, I've read it, and it's pretty jingoistic. So for writing this pamphlet, actually, though, I don't think that's true. I think the real reason he was knighted is that the Prince Albert, who became what, King Edward. Read only like a few books in his life. He wasn't, he was too busy cheating at cards and sleeping with other people's wives. But he read very little, but the only things he read was Sherlock Holmes. And when Conan Doyle brought Sherlock Holmes back, starting with the Hound of the Baskervilles, he was so thrilled that a lot of people think that's really the basis for why he knighted him. He couldn't say that in public, that he'd done it. So he had to use the Boer War story as an excuse. But given Prince Albert or King Edward's proclivities, I suspect he brought him back because he gave him the knighthood because he brought Sherlock Holmes back. And of course, Linda and Beth, there's the wonder, we talk about wonderful lines in the story, and I've fallen in love with promiscuous iconoclasts. But what's the line that Sherlock Holmes says about the press?
Oh, I have it somewhere. Too many
One of
notes.
the great lines in the canon, right?
Yeah, oh, shoot.
They can be of value if only you know how to use them.
Right. The press is a most valuable institution, ... if only you know how to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my notes. Yeah, it really struck me, having lived with reporters and on a daily basis and at my position at work, that we try really hard not to be manipulated and to try to put it out there. And that's still happening with the press now. And you see things so blatantly one-sided, which is now that if you put a byline on it, you can say pretty much whatever you want. So the one thing that I wanted to bring up that was at our last Holmes Hounds meeting, one of our other hounds made an observation, and I thought it was kind of interesting in regards to the mafia. And he says it was certainly would not have had anything to do with the mafia because the mafia is a Sicilian organization and Pietro Vannucci was from Naples. If he belonged to any criminal organization, it would have been the Camorra. So I thought that was kind of interesting, but how so many times he taps into crime syndicates or criminals from every place else but England.
Yep.
And did anybody have any other topics or any questions or thoughts on what we kind of talked about a little bit?
But Ken, I've got two things. One, I think Holmes makes a mistake when after the Harker breaking of the bust, he tells Lestrade and Watson that the betting is exactly 2-1 when they go out between Brown and Mr. Sandiford. But it's actually 3-1 because he doesn't know if Beppo found whatever he was looking for in Harker's statue. So he was a little optimistic there, although he was right. And then to Bob's point earlier about the evolving characters and Lestrade, while he is evolving, he's still the same old Lestrade. When he tells Holmes, "You're still after those busts," when he was more interested in the murder. So zebra can't change its stripes so easily.
Yeah, and Lestrade at the end invites Sherlock to come by the station where every other constable and detective would congratulate him that he was well thought of. But Lestrade certainly took a different tack in the investigation, although Sherlock utilized that information as well.